get started. Thanks for taking time out of your Saturday. I'm Isabel Browerman. We're all here to present our stories and our research, and we see that as a crucial part of understanding not only the reach of sexual misconduct on this campus, but also the culture of reporting. There have been enough of these stories for us to know that it's not something that just falls through the cracks. It's not a single report that was ignored, and it's rather a routine pattern of complainants who come forward and a pattern of being ignored, their information being taken and then filed away without the termination of the accused. The accused then continues on with previously reported predatory behavior waged against new victims. We echo the demands of other survivors for a reconstruction at the University of Michigan. Unlike some of the criticism we have received, we are here as members of the Maize and Blue, and we want to improve this school. And we want to offer our leadership as a way to improve it. Thank you, Rebecca Modrak, Tom Bray, Cassie McQuarter, Cecile, Josie, and the Stamps School of Art and Design for funding this event through the DEI initiative. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
How's this? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for letting me go first. I have to go to a wedding in Grand Rapids this afternoon, and I will try to make sure I get out of here without tripping on anything or embarrassing myself. Okay. I'm Tad DeLuca. I attended the University of Michigan from 1972 to 1976. I was on the wrestling team from 1972 to 1975. When athletes were recruited, the coaches promised our parents that they would look after us and be our parents away from home. Despite these assurances, as a 17-year-old student athlete at the University of Michigan, I was raped repeatedly by the University of Michigan team doctor, Dr. Robert Anderson, 4 times before I turned 18, at least 4 times before I turned 18 in December of 1972. These sexual assaults and rapes consisted of hernia checks, testicular cancer checks, and prostate exams. Something else I want to make sure that everyone knows is there is a verified paper trail of everything I'm going to tell you about. Copies of all the original paperwork are in the hands of the University of Michigan, a law firm that represents me, and a judge. In early 1975, my elbow started to dislocate all the time. I would go see the trainer would say, go see Dr. Anderson. I'd go see Dr. Anderson for my elbow, but I had a prostate check. I probably had 3 or 4 prostate checks in a span of 2 weeks. Now that I'm 66 years old, I get 1 a year. So they were totally inappropriate. He would send me to the trainer would tape my elbow. It would still come out of it. I was a wrestler, it would dislocate in practice. So I'd go back to the trainer, he'd send me back to the doctor. It went on and on and on. One night would have been just before my 4th or 5th visit to go see Dr. Anderson about my dislocated elbow. A friend of mine and I walked down the hall and saw a football player, and we talked to him. And I said, hey, man, I got to go see Dr. Anderson tomorrow. And this guy literally didn't quite go nuts, but he just started flailing his arms and almost in a tirade. And he says, oh, yeah, he's a pervert. Don't go see Dr. Anderson. My friend Jimmy went in for his shoulder, and he got the glove. And I remember sitting there in the hallway and just kind of, had no idea. It was 1970, I was 20 years old, and I was very ignorant of a lot of things. And so basically, the short version is, a man wanted to stick his finger into where my digested food came out, and it just wasn't something that I was able to deal with. And all I kept saying was, what's wrong with me? Why me? What did I do? Why does someone want to do that? And that was a loop that just played in my head for a very, very long time. Within a few seconds of processing what the football player said, I vowed never to see Dr. Anderson again, ever, never, and I didn't. The problem was my elbow. I was on a wrestling team. I wanted to compete. It kept popping out, and I had to learn how to wrestle and keep it in, and I wasn't very competitive, and probably the best way to say it, I slacked off because I had to keep the elbow in. It hurt. I couldn't tell the coach. I was 20 years old. I had all kinds of testosterone and ignorance. I couldn't tell the coach I let a man put a finger into my rectum. I mean, oh my gosh, how do you do that? Long story short, a couple months later, the coach wrote me a letter, really ripped me. And I wrote a letter to him, and here are the things I wrote to him. I said, quote, "Doctor, drop your drawers," unquote. I then told my coach, something is wrong with Dr. Anderson. Regardless of what you go in to see him for, he makes you drop your drawers and cough. In 1975, that's all I could talk about was just the hernia part. Okay? Then I wrote to the coach. I wet the bed. I crapped my pants at least 3 times. An irony of this is, one of them was coming out of the Modern Language Building 46 years ago. And I also told him about how I won't read it, my elbow came out, no one believed me. Okay? Basically, the coach took my letter and wrote another letter that was even worse than the first one, kicked me off the team. I had a full out-of-state ride. Everything was paid for. He took that away. Thousands of other survivors were raped by the Michigan doctor, and it was not medical treatment gone wrong. It was rape, but most of us didn't really realize it at the time. Rather than fire Dr. Anderson, report him to the police or the Michigan Licensing Board, however that's done, they punished me these ways. 1, I suffered near total humiliation when the wrestling coach read parts of my letter grossly out of context to the team. Total shame. I was kicked off the team. There were at least 2 attempts by the coach in the athletic department to break the apartment lease and get my roommates to move out. These are guys I see all the time. One of them just called me Thursday, 2 days ago. My full out-of-state ride was taken away. The morning after I got the letter that took away my scholarship, it's like I woke up and I wasn't me anymore because it was a pretty narrow existence as a wrestler, but everything I'd ever been was gone. I mean, I wasn't on the wrestling team. It's like, oh my gosh, I was empty. Michigan knew about this. Their own report shows that many, many people knew about this all the way from 1966. They protected a rapist rather than their students. I should know those 2 guys over there, 1977, 1988. I love those guys. They're great, but I wish I had never met them. Even though they live in tents, they are intelligent, vital people, and I love hanging out with them. They stay in tents. I go home. I stay in a hotel, and then I go home for a couple days. So they're the ones that are doing the lifting here. Someone else I want to acknowledge is Detective Mark West. I talked to him, and I reported a rape, and I told him what happened, and he was able to work with that, and he found 35, 40, maybe 50 other men who were able to talk to him. He got this ball rolling. He got over 950 survivors to come forward. The University of Michigan wasn't very appreciative of him. He's not a detective anymore. He was demoted. He's back on traffic. They cut his pay. Okay? So, and the lesson is don't mess with U of M. They will pound you. Okay? Probably the worst part about this is that by paying Dr. Anderson and giving him raises and praises, there were parts where they wrote wonderful things about him. They were doing all these things, and they were also guaranteeing him, this is gruesome, a steady supply of new victims every September for 36 years. Okay? They knew. I'll tell you this right now. Everybody knew for decades, and they let it go. And by the way, Mark West, he's easy to find. He's the tallest guy on campus. Chuck, who's pretty tall, looks like right here on him. So if you see this police officer walking around, Mark West, say something to him. He deserves an ungodly amount of credit. And like I said, he got pounded down. right now, I'm not relevant. I'm irrelevant to this story. The story is the University of Michigan is doing nothing to protect you, the students, the faculty, the staff. Every day we're out there, we hear more and more stories. I never expected to hear young women tell me stories of how they were sexually assaulted or raped. And I really never expected to have maybe 15, 20 men come up and tell me that. It was, this whole experience has been almost an out-of-body experience. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Chuck Christian.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you. I came to Michigan in 1977 to play football and to study art. This thing's moving by itself. To play football and study art. And I remember the first physical that I had with Anderson shocked me because what he did to me had never been done to me before. And when I came out of my physical, quote unquote physical, I asked another freshman football player, I said, "Did he put his finger in your behind?" He said, "Yeah." And I remember when Anderson did that, he checked my joints, he checked my elbow, he checked everything, but he made sure that he said, "Now bend over and I got to check your behind." And I'm like, what has that got to do with playing football? And then he put his finger in and I started screaming and screaming. And he said, "You feel pressure, don't you?" I said, "No, I don't feel pressure. I feel pain. I know the difference between pain and pressure." And he did the same thing to my teammate. And when I got back to the football building, I asked the other players, the upperclassmen, I said, "Did he put his finger in your behind doing the physical?" They all said yes. In fact, Chuck, look forward to getting that done every year. He did that to me for 4 straight years. And at the time, I did not know it was rape. I didn't find out it was rape until I was 60 or 61 years old. A friend of mine called me. I'm from Boston. I drive here every time I come, 14, 15 hours to get here. But a friend of mine called me when I was in the hospital because I was in hospital for cancer. My doctors had told me that they diagnosed me with prostate cancer 5 years ago. And they said they were giving me 3 years to live. I fired 2 of those doctors and I asked the third one, I said, "What are you giving me?" He said, "I'm just going to be with you as long as it takes." I said, "Good answer." But I ended up in hospice. I couldn't walk. My wife had to carry me to the bathroom. She had to clean me up and she had to put me back into the bed. I was on so many pain pills that I slept about 22 hours a day. It was brutal. But the reason I came down with cancer was because I would not let a doctor put his finger in my behind ever again. When I was 45, I began to have trouble with with my prostate, and my wife and my doctor were in the room, and I was talking to him, and he was asking me some questions, and then he went over into the corner and he went snap and put a glove on. He said, I need to do a digital exam. And it didn't sound like any big deal, digital, that's okay. That's a good word. But he was talking about something totally different. So I'm putting his finger in my butt. And I jumped up out of my seat and I said, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that. Nobody's ever going to do that to me again. And then I stood up and I walked out. My wife said, Chuck, stay around, stick around, see what he's got to say, check and see if there's not, make sure you don't have cancer. I said, no, nobody's going to do that to me again. And I walked out. And about 12 years later, I started having symptoms again. And I was getting up 8 to 10 times a night to go pee. And my wife said, Chuck, if you don't get that looked at, you're going to die. So she got my attention. I went and got it looked at. And when they looked at it, they found out that I had prostate cancer and that it was stage 4 and it had spread throughout my body, through my spine, my tailbone, my arms, my ribs, my kidneys, everywhere. I had cancer. And that's why they were only giving me 3 years to live. And I was in more pain than I've ever been in my life. The cancer was more painful than playing football. But the thing is, I didn't need to get prostate cancer because my doctor said, why didn't you come in sooner? I said, well, I did come in, but I wouldn't let the doctor do the prostate exam. And that was because I was never going to let a doctor or man do that to me ever again. Tad DeLuca was right. He told Michigan about Anderson back in 1975. If they had listened to Tad DeLuca, he was the only adult in the room. He put his all on the line to tell what Anderson was doing. If they had listened to him, I never would have been a victim. John never would have been a victim. And Anderson would have died in prison where he belonged. The hardest thing in my life was, there were two. One was telling my sons that their dad was dying of cancer. And the second was telling my sons that my team doctor raped me for 4 years, and I didn't even know. When we first came out here, we said, we're going to let these young people know about Anderson and about what he did to us. But it didn't take long. Maybe the first couple of days, we realized that the rape culture and covering up culture was still in place. There were so many young ladies and young men coming up to us telling us that they've been sexually harassed on campus. And one girl, she said, it took me over 7 months to get this thing reported because they made it so difficult for me to report my rape. There were some people that got up and told their stories of being raped, and they hadn't even told their own parents yet. And that's why we were here, was to make this place safe for all of the students. And that's what we want. Nobody was there for us. And we just wanted one man to stand up and say, enough is enough. One man to stand up and say, no more. But nobody stood up for us. So that's why the three of us are standing up for the students today, because the culture is still the same. And it needs to be changed. I have so much more to say, but I'm trying to hold it together. But I just want to say thank you to everyone that comes by the tent and say, thank you, guys. They come by the tent and they say, hail to the victims. They come by the tent in their cars and blow their horns. Try not to do that after 12 at midnight. But it's been so encouraging the support that we've gotten from the students. And enough is enough. And I asked the question a while back. I said, Jim Harbaugh, what would you do if you found out your team doctor raped your entire team this year? Not only that, Jim Harbaugh, what would you do if you found out your team doctor raped your team from last year and the last year and all 7 years that you coach, the team doctor raped your players? Would you just sweep it under the rug like Bo Schembechler did? Or would you call the cops and have his butt arrested? That's the question I want to have somebody ask Jim Harbaugh. What would you do? Because I know what Bo Schembechler did. I know what Don Canham did. They just let us be prey for this monster. And it's so sad because he didn't just rape athletes. He didn't just rape students. He raped neighbors and family members. But everybody is so worried about hurting the Anderson name that they never told the truth. And Jim Harbaugh is a complete liar if he says that he didn't know anything about it. Ward Manuel is a liar if he says he didn't know anything about it. Everybody that played for Bo knew. And they need to stop with the lies, because that's why we're where we are right now. I've had like 7 of my friends have died because they wouldn't go see a doctor, all because of all these lies. Jim Harbaugh ought to be ashamed of himself, and Ward Manuel ought to be ashamed of himself, because they know what the truth is.
John Vaughn.
Yes, good morning. Thank you guys for being here. So every time I'm asked to speak, I want to say something that's different, or tell you a story that inspires me about this topic, because we all have our Me Too's. And the last couple of days, just thinking about what's been going on at the university, as well as just some challenges that I had in this fight. You know, I feel like let's just be a little bit more interactive today than we would normally be. And I want to read you a statement. It asks you a question. Upholding University of Michigan's mission to serve the people of Michigan and the world through our preeminence in creating, communicating, preserving, and applying knowledge, art, and academic values, and in developing leaders and citizens who would challenge the present and enrich the future. Now, my question to you is, whose position do you think that is at the university in their responsibility? Who said the regents? Absolutely. It's the Board of Regents. And why I want to focus on them today is their policies, their procedures are what control this university. I've said it before, I'll say it again. President Slissel is a puppet, and the puppet masters are the Board of Regents. And far too long, now for 50 some odd years, this culture of rape, sexual abuse, and cover up has become a syndicate. And it's become a syndicate not only with the faculty being afraid of reporting, or supporting, because as one faculty member told me, it's career suicide. It's also a syndicate in that the brands that support this university and some of the media that support this university says things like, well, we can't continue to cover the largest sexual abuse and rape and cover up in the history of the sport because for the most part, it's just two black men speaking up of something that happened to them 30 years ago or a wrestler who couldn't keep his scholarship. Those are the things that we've heard. Well, I'm here to tell you this today. The Board of Regents is a publicly voted on position. And today I'm going to announce that I'm going to run for Board of Regents of the University of Michigan. Now, there are seats that are available in 2023, 2025, 2027, and 2029. And I say this because I'm not here for 2 years. I'm not here for 5 years. My life changed when I came to the University of Michigan in 1998. It's the first time that I believed that a fast black kid could do all the things that his mother raised him to be when I stepped on this campus. So my life is dedicated to the University of Michigan. People ask me all the time, why do you still wear Michigan gear? And I tell them two things. One, blue is my favorite color, always has been. And two, this is the university that I love. And it's gone on far too long that the Board of Regents, in the naming of buildings, in the taking donations, will let any student come by, three middle-aged men, and tell us, I spend more time on this campus thinking about when's the next time I'll be raped or sexually abused than I do thinking about my major. As long as I'm here, and since he won't talk to people in tents, well, now I'm in a camper. And I read this, I want to end with this so there's more time for question and answer because I love interacting with all of you. And this is a quote that I find so powerful, it gets me up every morning. And I say to you this morning that if you have never found something so dear and so precious that you will die for it, then you aren't fit to live. You may be 38 years old, as I happen to be, and one day some great opportunity stands before you and calls upon you to stand up for some great principle, some great issue, some great cause, and you refuse to do it because you are afraid. You refuse to do it because you want to live longer. You're afraid that you will lose your job, or you're afraid that you will be criticized, or that you will lose your popularity. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Or you're afraid that someday or somebody will stab you or shoot at you or bomb your house. And so you refuse to take the stand. Well, you may go on to live until you are 90, but you are just as dead at 38 as you would be at 90. And the cessation of breathing in your life is but a belated announcement of an earlier death of the spirit. You died when you refused to stand up for right. You died when you refused to stand up for truth. You died when you refused to stand up for justice. That was Martin Luther King in 1967, 1 year after Dr. Anderson came onto this campus. The Board of Regents, the office of the president, has died as it pertains to standing up for the rights of the human beings that make up this university. I am not John Doe, I am John Vaughn.
Thank you, John. Looking forward to your candidacy. Kathryn Mcmahon.
Okay, hi. First, I just want to ask for some patience because this is the first time I'm publicly speaking out. And just, again, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's speaking today. You are all amazing and inspirations, and I'm honored to be standing here with you. So I'm Kathryn Mcmahon. My pronouns are she, her, and I graduated from Michigan in 2008. In the fall of 2007, it was my final year, and I was lucky enough to get a seat in Bruce Conforth's senior seminar on blues music. I had first heard of Bruce in 2003 during my freshman orientation. He was the professor that you had to take a class from if you could get a seat in it. And so about halfway through the semester, there was a blues concert at the Arc that Bruce invited the class to go to, organized an outing, and afterward, he rallied some students to go to a bar around the corner. There at the bar, he waited for me outside of the bathroom. He grabbed me and he tried to get me to go home with him. I pushed him away multiple times without success. He told me that it wasn't for sex, it was for sleeping. He told me that he had a better mattress than I did. And it finally took me pushing him away and going back to the table to get away from him. I asked a friend to escort me home, and I got back safely. I told people I'm not one to keep that quiet, and my real friends believed and supported me. They encouraged me to keep documentation of everything and wait until I was ready to report it. Other students laughed in my face. Female students were about to go on a trip with Bruce to the Mississippi Delta, and I warned them, and they brushed me off because, of course, that's what Bruce did. He was the rock and roll professor. I had one student say, "Yeah, but you wanted it, right?" So I waited, and I waited. I graduated. I waited until I was out of his reach, and in May of 2008, I sat down with Pam Heatley, and I gave her everything I had. I provided documentation. I provided the emails where he admitted to what he did. I provided the emails where he begged me not to say anything because what about his career? And I did what I was supposed to do, what the university told me to do. And the system did the very least that it could. I expected some sort of accountability, and all I got was a last chance agreement. And it wasn't enforced. It was given to his department head, who was his friend, to enforce it. And instead of accountability, they emboldened Bruce. The university's inaction did two things. One, it gave Bruce the confidence to go further and push more boundaries and get worse. And two, it invalidated my voice and my experience. The biggest lesson that I learned here at the University of Michigan was that my voice doesn't matter. It's been 14 years since Bruce assaulted me, and I didn't meet another Bruce survivor until 2017. I spent a decade thinking that I was out of line, that I made too big of a deal out of it, when in fact, I should have never shut up. So now I sit here, or stand here, and I think about all of the times since 2008 when I should have spoken up and I kept quiet, when I could have done more. The times when I was told that I was too emotional or that I was making too big of a deal out of something. What did I miss? So no more. And here's the deal. I'm here because I love the University of Michigan. Graduating from here is one of the things that I am most proud of. My years here are mostly treasured, and many of my best friends are the ones that I met during my time here. And that's why I can't be silent. The university needs to evolve. It has to get better. For all of you that came here, for all of the students who aren't here, for all of the future students and for every alum, but especially for the ones who deserve justice. So no more voices silent, no more staying quiet. It's time for Michigan to get better, and it's time for Michigan and the Board of Regents to actually be the leaders and the best.
Maya Crossman.
Thank you to everyone that helped put this forum together today. Thank you for everyone for coming and for tuning in live. Thank you to all the women that I could not have done this without: Izzy, Kathryn, Lo, Cassie, Amelia, and Shayna. Thank you to Rebecca and the Stamp School for helping organize this event, promote it. Thank you, Kentaro, for your support as a faculty member as well. Thank you, Josie, for your support as a Michigan student. And thank you to my friends and family who inspire me and encourage me to be brave. And thank you for Tom for running tech. Throughout my time at U of M, I was not in Greek life, but I experienced Greek life. Just as I was not enrolled in lecturer Bruce Conforth's classes, but I was subjected to Conforth's teaching. Sexual misconduct from other students at parties was gone over in the sexual misconduct videos we had to watch as incoming freshmen in 2012. But there was no mention of what to do if assaulted by a faculty member. Incoming students should be warned about trusting not only strangers at a party, but also our teachers, who we don't often think of as strangers. We are told throughout our lives to respect and believe in our educators, especially when we respect and believe in the institution that they work for. I too love this school, and I too have stories of sexual misconduct at the prestigious University of Michigan. I woke up one weekday morning my freshman year and I didn't know where I was. I had been out at a fraternity party the night before. I didn't know the young man sleeping next to me or where my friends were. I was worried that I wouldn't make my morning class and that this stranger beside me might be super hurt I had been too inebriated the night before to remember all the laughs we may or may not have had. Women on college campuses have experiences like this every day. Not everyone may experience a blackout, but the feelings of shame after a sexual interaction that is not wholeheartedly and clear-mindedly consented to is a burden that many a woman I know have had to overcome and heal from. Though the unconscionably common assault that happens in Greek life is appalling, I am here because of my story on an even graver assault that this institution allowed to happen. Lecturer Bruce Conforth had a complaint filed against him in 2008 by my fellow survivor, Kathryn Mcmahon. Yet for the next 8 years, Conforth was able to curate his class rosters, take classes to Mississippi at the end of the semester, and lock his office door during office hours. Conforth selected his victims just as fraternity brothers and sorority sisters selected their tribes during rush. There were lines out the door in both cases. Conforth's classes would fill up so fast it was known among students to visit him in person to get in. This is how Izzy and I met him. He friend requested me on Facebook and began sending me articles on meditation and spirituality. I thought he was cool and a teacher who had a lot of knowledge to give students at umich, even if they were not in his class. When he got more serious about grooming me and gained my trust, he became critical of my choices and friends. He would see me in pictures at a party or tailgate and tell me frat boys had raped me, and I had been too drunk to know it. So how did he know it? Apparently, a fraternity member in his class had shown him a video. So he said. He used Greek life to perpetuate his own credibility with young women who were critical of Greek life like myself, even though I participated in it. Greek life helped keep me numb to Conforth's abuse and the abuse happening around me. Greek life fed my addiction to alcohol, acceptance, and dare I say cowardice. Conforth gave me a sense that someone was looking out for me, though. He confirmed that Greek life was a toxic force in my life and told me I could do better in all respects. He was adamant that those closest to me were taking away my power, when in actuality, my fear of him was. He was believable because I felt the powerlessness that he wrongly attributed to my life outside of our conversations. His words poisoned my relationships and my happiness, the likes of which no fraternity boy I knew could ever achieve. When Conforth stuck his tongue into my mouth as I tried to leave his office one day my sophomore year, it was worse than waking up in a stranger's bed. This was a mentor, over 3 times my age, who I respected and trusted, and he was violating me. His elaborate lies took away my sense of reality, and he used my deepest fears and shame to attack me. Up until early 2020, I thought the Illuminati could come after me in retaliation for not sleeping with Professor Conforth in 2014. Conforth, disguised as cult leaders, began emailing Izzy and I, which utterly shocked, scared, and silenced us. Conforth disguised his mental and physical rape as enlightenment. I never thought I would be able to do this, but I'd like to read you all an excerpt from one of these anonymous emails from the Illuminati. You must realize this is not a college affair. It is not a temporary attraction between schoolmates based on mutual proximity and simple lust. This is nothing like anything you have nor can conceivably experience during your transitory stay at your university. It is not like anything you will experience in any other part of your life. This is life love. This is about someone who altered their life for you, someone who lost their life for you, someone who regained their life only to seek your love yet again. Few people ever are blessed with experiencing such profound, in every meaning of that word, love directed towards them. The fact that the chosen one has directed such love to you compounds the profundity exponentially. I cannot, will not, tell you what to do. However, such a love is presented in human form perhaps once a century. If you pass this opportunity, surely no such love will ever present itself to you or perhaps anyone during your lifetime, that of your children or even your grandchildren. It is love unsurpassed. So do what thou will, but do not hurt the chosen one. When Conforth claimed to be overdosing on heroin in attempts to kill himself because I would not commit to a sexual relationship with him, I had similar feelings of guilt and worry that I had after blacking out. It was all my fault, and I had to get out, go to class, and move on. I had recently graduated. I was at work, and I got a call from an unidentified person at the OIE, now ECRT, U of M Sexual Misconduct Reporting Resource. Did I mind if they asked me some questions about Professor Conforth? I was paranoid there was someone listening in on the line. Was it him? I had never shared my story, and I didn't want to that day. I was terrified and too curious to hang up the phone. The questions were, did I draw a described sketch of two birds he or she must have had in front of them? I confirmed that I had, and that was the call. Those were the questions. My call with the OIE had been brief, but haunted me for a long time after that. I still felt I was in trouble. I had done something wrong by giving him a drawing. I cannot be sure what happened at OIE when Conforth was allowed to retire with his reputation intact. But it is clear that justice was not given to the brave women who reported him and the brave women who were still getting abused by him. Despite knowing their names, just as they had known mine, they didn't call them. I flew here today to support the other survivors of sexual assault at this institution. It feels important that we have these opportunities to listen to one another, learn from our mistakes, and heal as a community. It's time U of M does all that it can to protect students from predators. Thank you.
Good job.
Okay. My name's Isabel Browerman. The first time I heard about Bruce Conforth was in 2011 as a freshman in orientation. His popularity was widespread. He had won the Golden Apple the year before, awarded by the students to the best professor at the University of Michigan. 4 years. That was how many years had passed since Kathryn Mcmahon had let the school know that Bruce had sexually assaulted her. 4 years of magnetic teaching and storytelling, jumping on desks and wooing students with his legends of rock and roll, Buddhism, psychedelic research. 4 years of majority teenage prey being presented to this known predator by the place we students were calling home. The place we entrusted our minds and our bodies to. 4 years of Professor Conforth's growing confidence that he could be reported for violating his student, and by the end of that term, be rewarded for his performance with a trophy for best professor. The university allowed students to knowingly crown a predator. There is no excuse for my introduction to Bruce Conforth. This is the #1 public institution of higher learning. They cannot plead ignorance. UM has invested millions into a department devoted to, according to its definition, providing safe ways for all community members to report sexual and gender-based misconduct to the Equity, Civil Rights, and Title IX office. The staff is welcoming, sensitive, and trained to respond to aforementioned matters of sexual misconduct and violence. I should have never met Bruce Conforth after Kathryn's reporting. Instead, he was offered a last chance agreement. That's what they called it, a last chance agreement. Just don't do it again. The first time I was raped was in his office with a locked door, surrounded by signed photos of my heroes, also known to him as personal friends. Conforth's power as a Golden Apple rock and roll professor and cultural gatekeeper to arguably the best period in American art history, the 1960s, was his trap. His positioning as a popular, experienced teacher with an authentic point of view brought me down into a deep, dark hole where quickly and privately I lost control of my free will. I was kidnapped in broad daylight at the University of Michigan. Upon earning my trust, Conforth initiated a very twisted game of how far could he push me, how much could he make me believe, how many different ways could he scare me into submission, and then how many different ways and in how many different places could he have sex with me. As his student, Conforth now had ample opportunity to build a syllabus to benefit his abuse. He collected information on me to inform lies that would build a false world around me. Journal entries, creative presentations, required office hours. He told me he belonged to the Illuminati. He told me I was being watched by them, and that they were very powerful people who would have me injured if I did not comply with their demands. I began receiving encrypted emails hourly, warning me about my friends and increasingly interrogating my sexual past and shaming me for it, isolating me from my life, insisting that I service him sexually or else. The emails employed forgery of documents, charading as fraternity emails, stating that friends in a nearby fraternity were calling me Easy Izzy, and deepfake techniques where my face was superimposed onto another woman's body to make it seem like I was drugged, recorded, and raped. The video made it appear as though I was being recorded and raped during a frat party. He cyberbullied me via online aliases for being so reckless with my body, and then commanded to have sex with him to purify myself. Forced to change my phone number, to stop going by my nickname, which I gave myself when I was like 10, and to cut off all of my ties. There were multiple times in my abuse where I broke down to Conforth about how I wanted to kill myself because I felt trapped and because I couldn't exist as a failure anymore. To which he replied, "Just leave the Illuminati." I would try, but he grew more and more understanding of what agonized me and used it against me in the emails that he sent me. The only person left to console me in the secret world was Mr. Golden Apple, wise teacher himself, Bruce Conforth. Once I found my way out of the abuse, I had no connections to my old world anymore. The only way to crawl out of that kind of isolation is to try to re-socialize. That is very hard when your self-esteem has been brutalized to the extent of which I have no time or tools to address at this point. I will just say that I used to be very, very free. The OIE, now the ECRT, acted as an accomplice to this man by granting him the kindness of early retirement in 2017 as a way out of a thorough Title IX investigation after 2 more reports were filed by very brave women on December 21st, 2016. We deserved protection, and instead he was on the receiving end of UM's protection. Again, during this investigation, Pam Heatley and the OIE, now the ECRT, found a nude video of me on his umich email account. He told UM investigators that this relationship was consensual. And so, the department that is supposed to specialize in sexual misconduct took his 65-year-old word for it after having previous complaints and while filing an investigation from 2 more complaints. Why? Was it because he was as convincing to trained experts as he was to this ambitious teenager? Or was it because it was more of a liability to interrogate him than it was to turn a blind eye? I had years left with him after that investigation, after they found that video, where every day I contemplated ending my life because I could no longer stand his torment. And I could no longer stand the mandate out for my body to be used as his playground. He knew this, and he continued to play with my livelihood. Who is responsible for this? When I took it upon myself to confront Conforth in 2019, he confessed that there had been a young woman who sits beside me today who told me the truth because she knew it was wrong. I am humbled to have acquired a new family during this process. It is not without confliction that I both love my cohort and am disturbed by who wove it together. All of us were underestimated, and I am aware of that irony. I was admitted to this prestigious school because of my mental acumen, but no one anticipated that I might fight back. No one anticipated that any of us would fight back. I have worked tirelessly and am devoted to continuing this work alongside all of these wonderful people to form, I am working so hard for the school that I might be tenured, and I just didn't know it. All jokes aside, the work fell on us to form a coalition of survivors through online research, to find lawyers, to find doctors, to find journalists. My resilience is out of respect for myself, my group of survivors, fellow survivors, future survivors, and most astonishingly, my resilience is out of respect for this university. You must take accountability for your deeply rotten and unsafe system of reporting, which silences victims and emboldens predators by silencing their victims. Now look at your silence. Look how loud and strong your silence is. Thank you. So I think now we're going to do a brief Q&A. Okay, yes? Yes.
Hi, everyone. I think you all have hopefully note cards on your chairs. Feel free to write a question if you have any. Also, we have a board set up in the back, and after we read the questions, I can hand the cards back out, and you can write down different changes you want to see made at this university. We want to get community input on what you all think, because a lot of us are part of this school and we care about this issue. So if anyone has questions, feel free to write it on the note card, and it can be passed up to me, and I can read it out. Yeah.
Who is the highest university official that has personally apologized to any one of you?
Oh, well, there's a police officer that comes by every day named Dave, and we actually get to see Mark West about 4 or 5 times a week. Now, let that kind of sink in. They only let us talk to the police officers.
I don't think anyone's received an apology.
I received an apology from Sean, the detective at U of M, who's here. Thank you, Sean.
I've received apologies from faculty members that are acting as allies to this cause. Aside from that, no. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question. We have another question. Where are y'all at in the legal process, and what has that been like for you?
Can we answer that? Do you guys want to go?
We're in court-guided mediation, so can't really speak to that on camera. But off camera, we're in a similar situation to these young ladies. We're being dehumanized, we're being marginalized, we're being asked to speak at Board of Regents meetings that we have to play a guessing game to even see if we can get in to speak for less than 3 minutes. We've never sat down across a table with anyone, either outside of the attorneys. They have tons of meetings, but we've never ever been able to sit across the table with Mark Slissel or any of the Board of Regents and have an actual conversation to see how we resolve this issue.
I mean, we're in the very beginning stages of the process and can't get into too many details, but I will say that in order to get to this process, you just have to continue to tell your story, which is not easy. It's not something that's comfortable to do, and it's been put on the victims to continue to kind of demonstrate their pain and publicly demonstrate their pain and publicly relive their trauma over and over again to get anyone to pay attention to it.
For me, I've seen a lot of, the higher ups, they're saying, oh, you guys are so brave, and, thank you so much for coming forward. We appreciate you and all that stuff. That's what they say in public. In private, it's a whole nother story. My deposition was finally released after over a year because nobody wanted it to get out how badly Michigan treated a dying man during the deposition. For 6.5 hours, I was tormented by the Michigan lawyers. They called me everything but a child of God. The attorney, the deposition has now been released, so I can talk a little bit about it. But they were the most heartless and cruel team that I've ever experienced. I must have broken down crying in the neighborhood of 15 times because they kept trying to tell me I was a liar when I knew I wasn't. They tried to tell me that I misread something when I know I didn't. And they tried to tell me that Bo didn't know when I knew he did.
Thank you guys for sharing. So the next question is, during the grooming process, is there any way another professor could have intervened? And then what could they have said or done?
I could speak specifically to our story. There was a head of the department who's since deceased. He was aware of Bruce's last chance agreement. He was in the room when Bruce had been brought in for questioning after Kathryn had made her statement. Bruce introduced me to this man multiple times. And that man had his office a couple of doors down when Bruce had his door closed with me in the office. So there were things that could have been done, but more so there were things that weren't done.
So the next question is, it feels as though there have been little fires everywhere. How have you been working to unify coalitions?
Well, specifically me, I've probably met at least 4,000 to 5,000 students in whether short or long interactions in the 30s, would it be 36 days today, and several hundred professors. And I'm meeting so many different groups that are on campus and from student government to actually different fraternities, sororities. And one, we're keeping a very succinct message, but there's also an undercurrent of frustration and anger from multiple groups. And what I try to share is that I'm hearing this from other groups so that groups don't feel marginalized in its battle against the university. And I think that what you're having is the leaders of those organizations are looking to come together very soon, in which, at the end of the day, when the students mobilize on this campus, that's when change happens. And we're just trying to support that, and we hear you, and we're standing with you in solidarity, and that is our message. And that message seems to resonate with all the different groups. So there's so many acronyms, I can't remember all of them, but whatever you're involved in, talk to the leaders, because the leaders are starting to put together a plan in which we all, in unison, stand up to this university.
This is our biggest attempt at unifying.
Yeah, first step in the process. This question kind of goes off of that. There's kind of two related to this, is what can students and then overall the audience do who've come today to help out? What can students do in the audience today to help out with these efforts?
I think one thing that they can do is educate themselves. John's spoken about that a lot. I'm going to echo that. Educate themselves on what the policies and procedures are and what has happened with these stories where survivors have come forward publicly and have been silenced. The other thing is, talk to each other across groups, host each other, stand up for whoever needs standing up for, show up at the president's house. That's where John is. Show up for a cause with yourself and, physically take up space. And you're all students here. You have power to demand what you need and to demand a safe environment. And you can do that with your voice.
Yeah, my biggest thing is stand up for one another, and if you see someone who is hurting, you don't need to interrogate them, you just need to be there to support them.
So to what extent do you feel the university / Title IX has the capacity to properly enforce consequences for misconduct and violations overall?
They have zero capacity. Zero, because how can you police something currently when for half a century you've been unable to police it? This university has historically underperformed and underprotected the student body and the faculty. Like, those are the number two things at a university, the students and the faculty. You take all of you all away and it's just buildings. They've underperformed, and they tend to talk about hearing survivors, but there are no survivors that have any positions of power to speak to the victims.
What does it mean to be heard?
Yes. I watch a man, and then I have to congratulate Izzy on her bravery and maturity, because I'm not chasing him down. But I watch a man every day go to work on this university. He has never once interacted with a current student or professor on his way to work and on his way back home. You all are paying tuition, and the professors are hired to empower you. This is the time and the place in your life when you can dream it to be. And this is the man that is the leader. Attitude reflects leadership. And if the leadership doesn't care, and if the leadership ignores, you can put all the programs and policies in place, but they're never going to work. They're never going to work. You have grown men and women. You are now adults that are talking about sexual assault and sexual violence, and it is misreported, it is ignored, and we have a foundation of 50 years of a cover-up. It will never work. It's only, and you need to write op-eds, you need to go to the papers, you need to go to the media, you need to exercise your voice. I will tell you this, the only reason why I'm out here today is because I researched every protest at the University of Michigan since 1960 where the world was changed because the students mobilized. I still feel like a student of this university, and now I'm seeing every day the fear and the panic and the hopelessness, not just on this issue, but so many other issues that are current at this university. It is time to mobilize, and dare I say, shut this fucking place down. Come together and walk out and have your parents and others' parents start to call and find out, why is my child having to go back to school the day after there's a credible threat by the FBI? Ask those questions. Ask the questions of why a man who's on the Board of Regents, who says he's a victim, is lobbying against laws that protect these predators, that protect these rapists, that protect these faculty members that get time and time and time again to put you all in peril. Time for talk is over. Time for action is here.
In line with what John has just said, I was out at the tents where we stay in the cold and the rain, but we're there. And there was a young, a woman, she's a doctor now, she's about my age, and she said to me, she said, Chuck, you remember when you guys were playing football here at Michigan? I said, yeah. She said, I was in med school at the time, and I knew that Anderson was raping you guys. She said, but I couldn't say anything because I would get kicked out of med school. And the reason I knew it was because Anderson was raping us too.
You know, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. This university has lost its way. We are no longer leaders and best. But I will tell you this, if we all, whether it be faculty, current students, former students, if we come together, the one thing that you know is we are the #1 public institution in the world. So that means the world is looking at what's happening at Michigan. The world wants to hear your voice together. And I've always believed this. One man, one woman can change the world if he's standing next to another woman that is looking to change the world on the same topic. If we come together, if we stand in solidarity, because this is what they also want to do. They want you to stand alone on that ever-shrinking island of shame as a sexual assault victim or survivor. But when we come together, our islands grow. We stand in unison, and we scream until we can't scream anymore, and we march till we can't march anymore. But I'll be damned if I come back to the university I love in 10 years and hear another woman tell me, who's the same age as my daughter now, that I got through college thinking more about just let me survive from being raped than choosing what I want to do for the rest of my life. I will no longer let this university and those that run it break my heart. We have to stand, and we have to stand now. We do not want to be having this meeting next year, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now. The time to end it is now. The time to end it is now.
I remember when John told me on that Friday that he was gonna start the protest. I said, John, did you check the weather? He said, yes, I checked it. I said, what does it say? 90% chance of rain. I said, wait till Monday. It'll be better on Monday. He's like, Chuck, I was built for this. He said, I practiced in the rain, I played football in the rain, and I made a hell of a lot of money for this school in the rain. I can protest in the rain. And when I saw him in that little blue chair, I said, I got to get up there real quick with some camping equipment. So I drove 15 hours from Boston to be here with my friend. And we got to make a difference, people. We can't let this continue to go on and on and on. Because we see that nothing is going to change if we don't make it change. Because we saw 50 years of this BS going on, and nothing changed. And that's what we got to do. We got to make it change. And the difference now compared to what it has been in the past, usually the sexual assault cases are females. But when you take thousands of males and put them with thousands of females, they're in trouble now. They are in trouble now because our voices will be heard. Our voices will be heard, and we will make a difference. I don't care if you're a freshman or a senior. Our voices will be heard.
Okay, I think now is a good time for us to take a break. There's refreshments outside. Thank you so much. So please find your seats. Okay, thank you.
Hi. Oh, how is this? Hi, I'm Rebecca Modrak. Tom, is the sound okay? Thumbs up. I'm a professor in the Stamp School of Art and Design, and I'm also a member of the AAAC committee, which has the job of advising the provost, and one day a provost might actually take our advice. And I'm also a member of the Senate Assembly. In 2015, I started paying attention to issues involving OIE when I filed a report about bias that I had witnessed in my school. And this was just plain old bias, didn't involve sexual misconduct, but it gave me a lot of insight into OIE and how they function. So 6 months after I filed the report, the OIE investigator, who was also the jury and the judge, sent me the ruling, no bias, and the summary of her complete investigation, which showed that she had not interviewed a single one of the 5 witnesses that I had identified. And when I asked her, how can you come to a conclusion without interviewing any of these witnesses, she replied in writing that she had already deemed these witnesses' testimony irrelevant, even before talking with them. So, of course, I complained to the director of OIE, who at the time was Anthony Walesby, and within a year, the investigator of my case had been appointed the new director of OIE, and that was Pam Heatley. This is how I learned that OIE is not a neutral process. Over the years, this continues to be confirmed. It's evidenced further by documents from the 2005 report against Martin Filbert. OIE chose not to investigate because they decided they knew him. He was a good guy. Those documents and the Wilmer Hale report also show that the connections between OIE and academic HR and the Office of the General Counsel have a lot of backdoor negotiations that obstruct neutral investigative processes. Without a truly independent office, this campus will continue to harbor predators like Conforth and Anderson, and will continue to find a meager 3% of sexual assault offenses in violation each year. We need to establish a council of faculty, staff, students, and survivors to oversee ECRT. We need to include the expertise of survivors. I'd like to acknowledge the work of survivors on campus today. Today's event would not be happening without the fortitude and tenacity of Isabel Browerman. Isabel could have chosen to look the other way, or, as people say, somewhat obliviously, to move on with her life. But she recognized that, for her, moving forward is deeply implicated in looking back. The University of Michigan did not protect her and other women from Bruce Conforth, and did not protect students from Dr. Anderson. They chose to protect an inauthentic mirage of the university's reputation rather than the very real lives of people who entrusted us with their personhood. Isabel, Kathryn, Maya, Cassie, Tad, Chuck, and John, you embody the qualities of leadership and the ideals of this university: integrity, courage, perseverance, and compassion. As a faculty member, I thank you for representing us, for challenging what is corrupt and unprincipled about this institution, and for working to create the checks and balances that will protect our community moving forward. You make me proud to be part of this community. Thank you for being willing to exist in the discomfort this university created and to talk about what went wrong in order to make the campus safer. The least we can do is listen and act on your advice. And we need to listen on your terms, whether that be at this forum, on a sidewalk, or in front of a tent. Please know that many faculty support you. On October 4th, 701 faculty voted in favor of Faculty Senate Motion 4, which called for 3 policy changes recommended by the Filbert survivors. Number 1, require members of search committees to disclose suspected details of allegations of sexual misconduct with other members of the committee. Number 2, require chairs and deans to document in writing in a staff or faculty member's personnel file the basis for decisions on discipline relative to allegations of sexual misconduct. Essentially, hold administrators accountable for their action or lack of action. And number 3, require the ECR2 to cross-reference all prior reports when investigating subsequent allegations. And no, they're not currently doing this, despite what they say. Plus, a 4th resolution called for the formation of a committee made up of Filbert, Anderson, Conforth, and Lasecki survivors willing to serve, and informed faculty and staff to create additional policies to be presented directly to the Board of Regents. SACUA, which is the Senate Advisory Committee on University Affairs, the executive committee of the Faculty Senate, is now in the process of forming this committee under the leadership of Dr. Alan Liu. We faculty now call on the president and the regents to adopt the first 3 approved resolutions into the university's standard practice guide, and we ask the community to continue advocating with us for these changes. Now, please join me in welcoming another faculty member working on these issues. Kentaro Toyama is a professor in the School of Information and a member of SACUA.
Thanks, Rebecca. And so for the last 6 years, similar to Rebecca, I've been on what's called faculty governance at this university, which is a group of faculty that are on various committees and routinely interact with the executive officers of this university. And one thing I've heard over and over and over again is how nobody is satisfied with the way that this university handles issues of sexual misconduct. Certainly not the survivors, but not even the accused or the perpetrators are ultimately happy with it. And one question is, if that's true, what is the university really trying to do? Now, I don't think there's anybody at the university who's thinking, who gets a kick out of seeing more people sexually assaulted or otherwise, but I actually think the situation is far worse in some ways because what this university is doing is calculated, okay? It is outright evil, and what I'm gonna do is give you a few points that I have gathered over the years that I think make the case that this university is basically routinely prioritizing money over safety, truth, and justice. Okay, so the first is an article in the Michigan Daily, which, by the way, does incredible investigative journalism about these topics. It notes that when settling sexual misconduct claims, the university does its best to insert a non-disparagement clause. Okay, and the clause reads something like this, that the survivor agrees to the extent allowed by law not to make unfavorable or disparaging communications regarding the University of Michigan or the perpetrator. As the Daily article explains, in effect, the university administration is trying to buy silence from survivors when settling cases. Next, I want to highlight the legal opinions of a senior U.S. district judge concerning the case of David Daniels, is that the name? In the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. He's no longer with us as a faculty member, but was, and he had severe issues with sexual misconduct. And what this judge says is first that this investigator who was assigned to this case failed to sufficiently investigate an anonymous report of the faculty member soliciting sex for money, okay? And here's the quote that he has in written public documents. Had OIE been more critical and conducted even 1/10 of the investigation it conducted later that year, it would have likely uncovered evidence of the accused's pervasive misconduct. Okay, so that's basically the judge saying they should have investigated this more thoroughly. Okay, a second point that the judge makes was that the investigator's eventual report was shockingly mean-spirited about the complainant. Okay, and you've already heard something of this already on the panel. I will say I hear this all the time from people who interact with OIE and make complaints, which is the report that comes back is filled with things that make it look like the victim did something wrong, okay? So here's what this judge again says about this particular report. the court is deeply troubled that the university's response to a sexual harassment complaint is to publish a document filled with innuendo and rumor regarding the complainant. The OIE has managed to demonstrate a callous disregard for both the privacy of its students and the integrity of its investigation. Okay, now why would the university administration want to silence victims, want to avoid knowing about sexual misconduct, or once it decides to investigate, want to write nasty things in a report about the complainant? I think it's pretty clear that these are all ways in which the university is effectively protecting itself, right? The administration primarily, rather than trying to seek out the truth and trying to seek justice. So for example, it seems clear to me that silencing is a way to prevent bad news from emerging. That discourages potential donors to the university, and of course it also encourages people who have other issues to come out, and they don't want that to happen. Avoiding knowledge of bad behavior is a way for the university to avoid acknowledging that it knows something. It can claim ignorance in court and therefore not have to suffer as much should it lose a lawsuit. And finally, writing negative reports about accusers intimidates other survivors from coming forward. And I also think it is a kind of a advanced way for the university to kind of lay out its potential case should a lawsuit actually arise. So these things all point to a larger unspoken strategy at the university, which is to act in a way that minimizes the likelihood of incurring and losing lawsuits and maximizing its own bottom line. Incidentally, what's really disturbing about this particular case is that the investigator who was reprimanded by the senior judge, she has since been promoted multiple times and is now our university's Title IX coordinator. Okay, so finally I'm going to read to you the self-description supplied by a former Title IX coordinator for our university who incidentally is still employed on our Dearborn campus. This is a woman that was referred to earlier as Pam Heatley. Here's a description that she wrote about herself in something like a resume that was provided to a potential consulting client. Okay, she was offering services to another client, and this is her self-description. Okay, since joining the University of Michigan, none of the issues she has handled have resulted in successful litigation against the university. Okay, that's her advertisement about what she's good at. And that's probably the same basis on which the university hired her in the first place. I believe that particular aspect of the people who work in these roles at the university has not fundamentally changed. And I will say that all of that it's fundamentally evil, right? This is, when you hear administrators talk about these things, it's really easy to get lost in this haze of, this rule or that rule or this procedure or some kind of legalese, and you kind of get the impression that some kind of bureaucratic inefficiency or glitch is the reason why people are routinely not getting justice served. And my sense is that this is deliberate evil that is being made by administrators who are making a calculated decision to preserve the university's finances while allowing sexual violence to keep happening on this campus. It is evil to pretend ignorance while knowing that people are being harmed. It is evil to have enabled injustices and not to make amends. It is evil to continue to employ people in roles that oversee sexual misconduct cases when those very people have spent their careers finding ways to twist and hide and obscure the truth. And above all, it is evil to put money over safety, truth, and justice. I really do want to thank the brave members of the previous panel for coming forth. One of them said it, but unfortunately, the reality is nobody pays attention without these stories coming out. And I really think, one thing I've heard over the years, by the way, is that there are thousands of these stories. So the little bit that we know, however terrible it is a tiny, tiny bit of the total amount that is happening. I will say that I completely agree with all of the recommendations and suggestions that people are making about what the university should do, but the root cause of this is an underlying decision made deliberately by the administration to preserve its finances rather than come out and tell the truth. And I think the real only way that this is going to turn around is if we hear a public acknowledgement from the university that that has been its strategy for however many decades, and that they are going to turn this around. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so glad to see so many people here in support of the survivors and the faculty and just team members that are trying to make this campus and, you know, the world a better place, like Mr. Vaughn said. My name is Kelly McClintock, and I am an attorney at Graywall Law. We are one of the firms who are proudly representing a lot of the survivors you heard today. We represent over 300 of the Robert Anderson survivors, and we're also working with Isabel, Maya, Kathryn, Lauren, and the other women on the Bruce Conforth case. Our firm, we are deeply committed to seeing institutional change happen at this university and others. Graywall, we helped secure the $500 million settlement at Michigan State University in the wake of the Larry Nassar scandal. So we, of course, know that this isn't a problem just here at Michigan, and that, in fact, predators have flocked to our public universities amongst other places for the reasons that have been spoken about here. There's been a culture that has tolerated it. There's been a steady pipeline, sadly, of victims for these people, and a culture of enabling. And what I wanted to talk about in my remarks today is about what needs to be done outside of these college campuses in order to stop sexual assaults and sexual misconduct, because it's not only what happens and the policies and procedures on campus that need to change, but we need to also look to our legislators both in Lansing and in Washington, D.C., and we have to see statutory schemes be changed to stop protecting the institutions and the people there who are failing to protect our young people. So I wanted to, a couple two main things here in Michigan, I think, that have contributed to continued abuse without real substantial change is our statute of limitations that would allow victims of sexual assault to sue individually in a civil lawsuit. The statute of limitations is basically, there's all these exceptions, but if you are injured before you're 18, you have until you are 28. And research shows that, in fact, most people who are abused as children won't have the mental, emotional wherewithal until their 40s, 50s. So there's no reason, and states all across the country are changing the laws to comport with the research that we know what the research says and the time that survivors need to come forward. Michigan has one of the worst statutory schemes in the country, and the legislature has taken they are taking a piecemeal approach to fixing this. So in the wake of the Larry Nassar scandal, they passed a bill just for Nassar victims to allow them to file suit. And that was instrumental in getting MSU to come to the table and make that settlement amount. And so while obviously that was a good thing for those victims, it didn't change the statute of limitation for everyone else. Now the legislature there is a bill that's heading to committee that we think will pass that's creating a window only for Robert Anderson survivors to bring suit. And again, that is great. But what about now my Bruce Conforth survivors? Is the legislature, every time there's a big scandal, just going to pass a bill for the small survivors in that case? It's not an effective way to legislate, and we really need folks like you to be reaching out to your local legislators to say, we want real statute of limitation reform. At the federal level, I wanted to speak to a couple bills that are pending in Congress and encourage you to do what you can, write to your Congress people to start conversations and to help educate the community that there are some bills out there and we've got to keep fighting for them. The first bill was introduced by Debbie Dingell on September 28th. And it's called the Title IX Take Responsibility Act. And this law would it's trying to hold the universities accountable if they do not have an appropriate response to a sexual misconduct claim. The bill would actually define and set a standard for notice and reasonable care, and then it would give any individual the right to sue that university if that standard of care and if reasonable care is not administered to protect students. And the second bill that I wanted to bring everyone's attention to is called the Alert Act. This bill is a bipartisan bill, which is very encouraging, and it was brought by a slate of congresspeople from Michigan, sadly because of all the trouble we've had at our Michigan universities and the sexual misconduct that's occurred there. And the Alert Act would require the leadership of universities to personally sign off on a report about all of the sexual misconduct that the university investigated each year, and the president of the university and at least one trustee person from the board would have to annually certify a report and send that to the Department of Education. So that again was brought by a whole slate of congresspeople from Michigan, Representative Slotkin, Representative Upton, Representative McLean, and then our two senators, Stabenow and Peters, have also signed on to that legislation as well. And so thank you all very much for being here. And in addition to, I would hope, partaking in some of this legislative advocacy, I just want to remind everyone that part of changing the culture here at Michigan and anywhere else is we have to believe survivors. And when we hear our friends and our family or acquaintances, or we see in the comment section someone saying something to undermine the credibility of a survivor and just speaking in a mean-spirited, not trauma-informed way, we have to stick up and we have to stand together and show solidarity to our brother and sister survivors. So thank you, and God bless.
Hi, all. It's incredible to follow those of you who spoke on the first panel. I consider it an honor. I haven't gotten to hear those stories live. I've obviously been following them, and also my colleagues here. So I am Sarah Prescott, and I am also an attorney. My mother retired from this institution. My husband is a professor at this institution. I count many people at this institution as friends, and I have been suing this institution for as long as I've lived in Michigan. I run a law firm called Salvatore Prescott Porter & Porter, and we have represented Nassar victims, U.S. Olympians against the gymnasts against the U.S. Olympics. I represented the 9 Filbert victims who came forward, and I will fill in a little bit on that for those who don't know that. And then I also represented the Lisecki victims. Those names roll off my tongue. They're familiar to me, but I think why they're important in this room is because they paint a line from the year 1966 to 2021. Okay, because we have Anderson in 66. Martin Filbert came to this institution in the year 2004, and reports in writing about his misconduct begin to bubble up, as far as I know, in 2004 or 5, and maybe even earlier. They are a steady drumbeat that go through 2010, when Mary Sue Coleman decided to promote him to Dean of the School of Public Health, despite written multiple reports. And when Rebecca stood up here and said, let's have a policy where promotions committees have to share information they know about the people they're considering, that's because everybody knew what Martin Filbert was, and there was no requirement to let's bubble that up and actually talk about that and report that and put our names and sign our names to it. When Rebecca stood up here and said, let's have a policy, and we voted on a policy, and 700 members of the faculty have voted that there should be a signature by a dean about what he or she is deciding when it comes to a report on somebody, and it should be in that person's personnel file and it should follow them, that's because Ken Warner at SPH, whose name I'm happy to use here, knew what Martin Filbert was, called him in, and Martin Filbert told me his own self, because I do sit down with people on all of this and find out for myself. And Martin Filbert told me, yeah, Warner called me in, he was the dean, I was the associate dean, and he said, I'm not gonna ask you any questions because I don't want you to lie to me. Knock it off. He said the conversation was less than 5 minutes long. So again, we have a dean, an associate dean, and the dean says, I'm not going to ask you any questions because I don't want you to lie to me. And Warner left this institution never having signed his own name to anything saying, I'm letting this guy have a pass. So that's why we have a proposed policy now, and it's something that should be taken up. These are real suggestions coming from real world events. Okay, and Martin Filbert went on from 2010 when he became dean, and Mary Sue Coleman let that happen, and Phil Hanlon, who's running the show at Dartmouth right now, they all knew what Martin Filbert was. Mark Schlissel knew what Martin Filbert was, and a regent of this university specifically said to him, haven't we already been sued because of Martin Filbert? And in fact, the university had been sued. And said, why are we promoting this guy? Schlissel said to this community, the day they walked Filbert out, I quote, the 16th and 17th of January 2020 was the first I became aware of any allegation whatsoever. That was reported in the press. The president of this institution said, whatsoever. A report by Wilmer Hale, and as found out by others, found that in fact, there were multiple avenues of reporting, and in 2019, a faculty member had written, quote, that Filbert was, quote, a notorious sexual predator, physically cornering and emotionally coercing his female graduate students in his toxicology lab. If my own case were not beyond the statute of limitations, I would have come forward when he was appointed in 2017. I hope someday his many, many crimes against women will be revealed. Schlissel's answer to that, because this was to him, was, I didn't read it. Okay? So, and there's so much more I could tell. Lisecki was 5 women coming forward literally last year to OIE, and the governing body of computer science, he's a computer scientist, had said, you're not welcome back at our events for years. Based on these women, the University of Michigan found no reason to discipline him in any way, and decided that 5 women were each just his word against hers, and that is how that went. So we can admire the problem all day. Like, we can stand here and talk about the problem. Is it Schlissel? Is it the regents? Is it Pam Healy? Is it, whomever, OIE? What I'm here today to say is, to me, what we can walk out of this room with is a clear understanding of what I hope as a lawyer everybody's project is when they become a victim. What is your project? What is your how do you define what to do? If I could send one message, it would be that, and so here it is. I think you have to define the project as, I'm going to do what I can do. I'm going to own what I can own. And I'm going to let the injustice of the world and all of this corruption and wrongness and evil, I'm gonna take my stand and be what I can be. Because if you define the goal as, I'm gonna do what I can do, then you succeed, right? You do it, and you let the other victims lock elbows together. You let time take its place. You let lawyers help. You let the legislature help. But you do your piece And then you can find peace in that. Because if your goal is to fix everything all at once, we will all sit here and we would leave this room and we would go, it's just broken and it will never be fixed. And then we won't act. Okay, so the project has to be, how can I do what I need to do to bring light to my piece of this so that it can be dealt with? And you know, I hear, like with Ms. McMahon, you know, there are people who don't get heard, but they are the foundation for the next victim to be heard better. That's what some people can do, is be the building block. It doesn't mean that you get justice visibly right away, but if we let that stop us, then there's never justice. Okay? And then the silence just creates more opportunity for further victimization. So the goals are: get educated about right and wrong. Talk in a whisper campaign. Find out. Talk to other women, men, victims. Okay? That's time tested. It's gone back into history. But people will say, do you know? And did he do this to you? And did you whatever? Okay? Because then you're educated. And it's informal, and it's costless. And you can figure out what's going on, and you can find allies. And then number 3, I would tell people, and I will tell my own children this when they get to this age, you've got to get help. Okay? Sometimes that help is just an ally that's a peer. But being a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer, this stuff is hard. This stuff takes, I went to Harvard Law School. Like, this takes all my experience and all my knowledge and all my legal training, and it's still hard to guide people through it. Don't feel that you have to do that alone. It's not something that's easy to handle. And lawyer, whether it's a lawyer or a faith leader or a parent or somebody else that you trust, sometimes their distance and their objectivity can help bring something into focus that you've lost focus on or objectivity with, like being groomed. Okay? So it doesn't have to be a lawyer. Lawyers are great because they're confidential, and it's, you know, a client's decision what to do, whereas a parent might want to take more action. So it depends on anyone's circumstances. Does that make sense? But the bottom line is, whether I'm talking to women or men who are in their 50s, or I'm talking to teenagers, this stuff is hard to do alone. So you've got to find help to do the thing that you can do and make the change you individually can do. And if you define your project as, I'm going to do everything I can do to make this situation right and better, then you've defined it in a way that you can succeed at it, and that you can avoid being disheartened by the enormity of the problem, right? Because that would be a really bad message to leave here with, is like, oh, this and that, and it's been 50 years, and it's terrible, terrible. But that can't stop us from individual action. Does that make sense? Okay, well then let's have some Q&A. What do you think? Yeah? Thanks.
All right. Thank you to our panelists for sharing and your advocacy. If you have a question, please write it down, and you can also feel free to come up to the podium if you'd like to speak directly. And I also want to say we have a board to collect if you have any ideas about things you'd like to see changed, whether it's on the campus, whether it's in Michigan, or on the federal level. So the first question we have is about the bills for a specific group of survivors. Can you address issues of class and opportunity that you must be assaulted by someone prestigious at a prestigious place in order to be heard?
Beginning of that.
Yeah. So the question is, can you address issues of class, and opportunity that you must be assaulted by someone prestigious at a prestigious place in order to be heard?
That's, yeah, that's a complicated question. I do think, oh, just like this? Okay, thank you. I think that it is very difficult to bring attention to cases that where the defendant is someone who the media or the news might feel is less newsworthy. Absolutely, that's an issue. There's also the issue of how, again, going back to our laws, in that if you want to pursue a civil suit against someone, you have to have a collectible defendant. So I think that if there were laws that protected and held institutions accountable, then people wouldn't be turning to the civil justice system, and it wouldn't be so, I guess, frankly, money oriented. So how do we, I guess I would say, like, level the playing field and make it so no matter who is the person causing harm, that it's taken seriously and that people are paying attention. It goes back to the same issues we've been talking about. It's changing the culture. It's zero tolerance. The same rules apply to everybody. And then, you know, if people are held to the same standard no matter who they are, then large or small, when someone makes a report that there's been sexual misconduct, I think it's taken more seriously. So I guess to address it, again, I think you just have to continue to put in more strict and serious protocols and reporting procedures.
And I'm going to combine several questions about changing cultures. So what are your thoughts about a coordinated community response team?
As inspiring as I try to be that any individual should act, the true reality is that historically what we see work is multiple victims banding together. I mean, it's just true. And you see that with, you know, what we heard today about the first reports against Dr. Anderson. You see that with our you know, the Nassar victims, Filbert victims. I mean, I could go on. I mean, it's, their name are legion. People need support in this process. It is a hard process. Sadly, co-victims are often the only people who understand. Ideally, there would be allies that don't actually have to be victims themselves, and organizations that lock you know, arms together, right? Because we don't need a victim factory to believe people, right? We shouldn't need. But I mean, community action is the only way forward here. Period. I mean, I don't know what the alternatives would be. A very powerful, I mean, look, I mean, it would be great if the very tippy top of this university actually was going to be the change that we want to see, but that's not happening. So it has to be grassroots, period.
Just want to address that when we were trying to find a journalist, we had to pitch our story as important enough. And that was, you know, that I had to pitch that I was raped by someone that was important enough to be heard. Not us, that person, that perpetrator. And then the other thing is, from a criminal perspective, I am a white woman, and I had no hesitation when I decided to go forward and tell the police. And that's not something everybody has the privilege to do.
Thank you for sharing. The next question is, why aren't the regents here today? And would you like to see the university invite victims/survivors to tell their stories between the president, regents, and other executive officers to hear, listen, and be present?
I would like no more meetings with the president. I would like him to not be the president.
I know we did invite, I mean, we really wanted people who could do something to be here. So among those invited were Tammy Strickman, the director of ECRT, President Schlissel, Provost Collins, all of the regents, and none of them are here.
We, as survivors, a lot of us on the Conforth case also wrote him personally, President Schlissel.
And, oh.
Blessings and love to y'all. Friend of y'all, if you don't know me, I'll be a friend. Local, not a university person. My father was a professor. Love this university, but don't love it right now. Taking some time off of football. Don't give a rip what's happening right now. Social worker, not lawyer. My question is, it looks like you all have the civil part figured working. What's up with the criminal? These cases of these folks part that spoke today, maybe Jonathan and Chuck and so forth, they're a long time ago. But what's up with, why isn't there FBI agents on campus from the Department of Justice? We have a very kind administration now as of January. Dana Nessel is a kind woman, I think. Gretchen Whitmer, I've looked her in the eye. I worked at the vaccine clinic in Ipsy. She's a good person. I don't think she would turn away, but it may be too charged. She's got stuff on her plate. They tried to take her out in the middle of the lake. So, Joe, Vice President Kamala, you know, what's up? Madonna, Lucy Liu, James Earl Jones, Tom Brady, Jim Harbaugh, people with voices, Twitter. We saw what could happen in Houston with Twitter. So those are separate things, the social media campaign, civil. I'm not a lawyer. I'll stay in my lane. Civil, but criminal. Current cases. Shit happened in the last 5 years. Why aren't the FBI agents on campus now that we have a new administration? No disrespect to university police, whatever they're called now. No disrespect to Washoe County. Ali Savitt, I think he's a great guy. I think he would be interested. Our reps are Yusuf Rebi, Jeff Irwin, great people, locals. We got good people. I think we're all scared from the last administration. January, going forward, we're good. I think we're good. A lot of evil people in the Michigan Senate that are blocking Governor Whitmer. I'm sure she's got her plate full, but we got to get this stuff figured out for town.
I can say that campaigns are being launched by our law firm and others to get the Department of Justice to conduct a thorough investigation here as to how the sexual misconduct reports have been handled by OIE or whatever it's called now. So that is what happened at MSU after the Larry Nassar case, and so we're hoping that the same thing will happen here. And I think Sarah has more to say on that, and I will let Isabel herself address the criminal component of her case if she is comfortable. As she indicated, she did go to police
So if she is comfortable updating, I will leave that to her.
I did go to the police, and it has been recommended that he be arrested. That's in the prosecutor's office. Professor Bruce Conforth. He is alive, yeah.
I mean, you know, every victim has a different threshold for what they can handle. And, you know, the criminal system feels scary. And, you know, I've dealt with a lot of victims who have a difficult even for them to understand feeling that they don't want their harasser or rapist in jail is an interesting dynamic. I know. Some do, some don't. There's a lot of grooming and a lot of affinity. Sometimes people are family members. Sometimes, you know, there's complications. So the truth of the matter is that it's just such a victim by victim reality for what people can handle. And what I've mostly experienced is people want someone to know that a harasser or assailant is dangerous and they want it stopped. And then they kind of want it to be as small in their life as possible. So much of what motivates victims is, don't let this happen to someone else. Let me stop this. And so, you know, do they need to go to jail for that, or do I just need for the institution to take them out of their position of power? So sometimes I think that's the dynamic.
Thank you all for sharing, and we have one more question.
The fact is, this isn't going to change unless we do something about it. So I'm going to go straight to the point. I don't want to see any one of you attending a class or giving a lecture for the next 2 weeks. We need to show the university that we will not attend a school that allows this to continue. This needs to end now. Oh, yeah. And that includes doing your homework on Canvas. That includes attending online lectures. Lost my train of thought there. This is my first time doing anything like this. But anyway, send emails to your professors. Tell them not to come too. Send emails to all your classmates. Tell them not to come either. Send emails to your best friends and tell them not to come either. We need to shut this university down because that's the only thing that gets results. The only way to make the system change is to force it to change. It's just one big machine. So what we need to do is to gum it up until it's forced.
Thank you so much.
Synthesize that and questions about joint action and grassroots action. I mean, the answer is that people like plan it, right? Like make a plan for what the demonstration will be, for what the action will be, for what your own individual report might be walking out of here, or for that friend that, you know, might need some support or a nudge. You know, I think that if you do decide to take actions that are, you know, following on from here, you know, do it with each other and make a plan to do it and get the word out so that you can make the ripple as broad as it can be. Does that make sense? And you can get your allies with the faculty and let people know what the organized vision is going forward. But please remember, you know, each individual matters. It does matter. Please don't walk out of here and say OIE is so broken. They are. They drive me nuts. That I drive them nuts. It's a it's a healthy exchange of opinions. But please remember that it matters so much to the third victim that victim number 2 and victim number 1 spoke up. It matters hugely. And even if it's hollowing out to victim number 1 not to be heard, as we've heard, these things go on. Assailants get emboldened. They continue on. And so the individual voice matters, even if it's not a 2-week-long sit-in that everybody in the whole campus is paying attention to, one person can make a huge difference. There was a woman with Filbert who made a huge pivotal difference in 2004 by reporting and writing to what the other women were able to do with him. So does that make sense? So I would just suggest that if you're ever like, how do we do it? It's too big. How do we organize it? Individual actions can really, really matter in this stuff.
Okay, thank you everyone so much. There are bagged lunches outside. Feel free to take one. And thank you so much for coming and listening and contributing your thoughts.